Welcome back to Insight Club. Today we're talking about assumptions we make around what it means to agree. Stick around. The first rule of Insight Club is you don't talk about Insight Club. You do Insight Club. The second rule of Insight Club is the only assumptions we make about one another are that we all want happiness and we all want to avoid suffering. The third rule of Insight Club is you check all your other assumptions at the door. We hope these conversations will bring you insights that incite you to action. Welcome to Insight Club.
And you ask yourself, where is my mind? Where is my mind? Where is my mind?
Where's your mind today?
Oh, today the line about we check all our other assumptions at the door made me think of being childlike and being in wonder. And of course, we're recording this on the 2nd of January, so we're just coming off of the holidays and Christmas and thinking about that message shows up again and again in the New Testament, right? Is you have to be childlike, you have to be like a child. And I think it's so misunderstood so often because a lot of people really denigrate children and think, what, you have to be immature, but it's that wonder, right? It's that leaving all the other assumptions at the door. It's that, wow, I wonder what this is. Oh, I don't know. Let me find out. So that's what struck me in the opening today. How about you? What's on your mind?
That's so true. Actually, I feel like I'm just gonna roll with what you just said.
Yeah.
I feel more and more I pay more attention to kids to learn than to experts and adults and so on. And we had too much time where kids were dismissed, like you were saying, like, oh, they don't know anything, they're kids and so on. But I feel like if we pay attention, they have quite a lot of wisdom that we miss because we get too much into the seriousness of things.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's a big assumption of like what's wisdom actually.
I was thinking about this the other day. For most people, when they see babies or toddlers or young children, there's this natural joy they get, right? Like you see somebody walk by a baby and they're like, "Oh, hello," right? And I was wondering, at what age does a human being lose that effect on us?
Mm.
Because it happens with babies and then it happens with little toddlers, and then it's like, what's that age where we stop looking at their wonder of the world and thinking it's a great thing and we start thinking they're annoying?
Yeah. That's a good question.
And I don't know what it is, but I just like that popped into my head because when a baby does something, it's funny, even like in terms of bodily functions, right? A baby toots and we're like, oh, good job, right? You're learning how to pass gas. That's so important. And then just like you get older and you toot and people don't appreciate it. But those feelings we have of like everything the child does is special and precious, and like a human being discovering how to be human, and we want to like honor their wonder, and it just slowly disappears into. And I know a lot of people who like children but don't like people.
Oh, tell me more about that. That's interesting.
Well, like a child will go by and they'll immediately become engaged. There's a child in the vicinity and immediately they're like, oh, hi, and like wanting to play and would do that. And then, a grown person does something and immediately it's like, you're doing that because you're in my way. You're doing that because you're not a thoughtful person. You're doing that because you're rude, impatience, not giving the benefit of the doubt, not even acknowledging like you're a human being with your
Yeah.
own desires and your own narrative. Like you're obviously just doing that to make my life miserable.
At what age do we pass our judgment to others?
Yeah.
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 Mm. That's interesting. And this is an assumption, or I should say, an hypothesis.
Yeah.
It could be at the age where we started judging ourselves.
Ooh. I think there really is something to that because I've experienced this. I don't have my own children. I've spent a lot of years babysitting. I've been around kids a lot. And I've definitely had the feeling, especially with kids in my care, like when I was babysitting and nannying, um, the embarrassment of they're doing something like, oh my goodness, being with a 3-year-old in a supermarket who starts having a tantrum, right? And is like, I want the candy and I want the it's this feeling of embarrassment. Like that behavior reflects on me. And it takes a lot of wherewithal to just engage with the child and the child's behavior as opposed to doing kind of whatever we think is going to work to make it stop so that we're not embarrassed anymore. Right. Like, and it's actually one of my prouder moments in the in the whole time I've spent with kids. In that moment with the 3-year-old in the grocery store, I was able to just engage with her, be like a calm but firm presence, right? Like, we're not gonna get candy, we're gonna go home, we're gonna have lunch, you're gonna be okay. And let the embarrassment go on and let the people be looking at me and thinking whatever they were thinking. But I think you've stumbled on something correct where if the behavior in the child elicits shame or embarrassment for us for some reason, like maybe it's because like that's a behavior we've done or we recognize, or just like this feeling of the social pressure of, it's my job to have this kid behave. That would absolutely spark the the difference between the awe and the wonder and the you better behave.
Yeah.
Was there something specific that you had in mind when you were thinking maybe it's the age at which we
No, that just popped in my mind, and I was like, huh. Because, we are all mirrors and we're always reflecting something. And usually the things that trigger us are the things that we haven't healed. So, of course, you're not going to judge a baby when they are having all their, even like, I don't know. I forgot the word. But anyway, when they're doing something that might seem like not acceptable for an adult.
Yeah, they're whining, they're screaming, they're fussing. Yeah.
But at the moment where we started judging and we think like, oh, I don't know, let's see, 3 years old, you should be at least behaving, or that you shouldn't be yelling at the supermarket or something like that. You're gonna pass along that.
Yeah. And you know what? I mean, there are some people who do have that judgment about a baby. And like you see, it's frightening. But you see people who, when a baby is crying, are screaming at the baby, like, what's wrong with you? You're fine, there's nothing to cry about. And that brings up for me like, what was the parenting like for that person who's now having that behavior, right? And in psychology, there's all of this language around like attachment, right? And how secure your attachment is. And so that I'm like, oh, that's how we pass on abuse as well, right? So if I was a baby and I was crying and my needs weren't met, then now when I'm the parent and the baby is crying, I'm not able to meet those needs. I'm immediately putting that on the baby going, shut up. What's wrong with you? And we're passing it along. So it's more than just the self-judgment. It's the, we're replaying what we received.
Yeah.
Or didn't receive. Yeah. Oh.
Yeah. There's a line that I'm gonna probably paraphrase from Carl Jung that says that the unconscious remain something around this line, that I forgot completely, but anyway, unconscious remains like unknown until we make them conscious. Basically, it's running our life until we make them conscious, something like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot of these things that if someone had judgment when they were a baby, they probably wouldn't remember that. But yeah, it would be in the subconscious either way.
Yeah. I feel like this is actually a great segue to what we planned to talk about, which is this idea of our assumptions around agreement, because this creates a very rich context for showing why it's going to be very challenging for us to agree on I don't know, like what's the best way to respond or why things are the way they are, given that we're all operating in a largely unconscious milieu of these things we determined were true about the world from a very young age, like from our, first days of being a baby and crying and how are our needs met or not met, right? Like we're all operating on these um facts that we've generated, like the world is like this, the world is like this, the world is like this. And even, I mean, even siblings, right? They always say that you didn't have the same family that your older siblings had, and they didn't have the same family you had, right? Like your parents are
Yeah.
different people. The fact that you have a sibling, like, it has changed the context. So given that we're all really operating from maybe 95 in some cases and maybe 85 in some cases, unconscious, determined truths about the world, how could we expect that we would see the world in the same way?
Yeah.
And what brought up this topic for me is there's a situation right now where I'm in it and part of it, but I also like I'm a little bit outside of it because everybody else who's in it has like a much like stronger stake in it, I guess. And what I'm able to observe is that as they're trying to resolve this conflict, everybody's fear is triggering everybody else's fear. Right. And so one person's like, we need to do this, which triggers that, like, no, that would get, and it's just kind of going around and around like a pinball, where in trying to agree on not a course of action even, but like on this is what's true, it's everybody is speaking from their fear and it's triggering the fear of everyone else. And so I'm watching that and I'm going, wow, if resolving this like pressing situation in 3D reality relies on us all agreeing and seeing from the same point of view, we're screwed. But if we didn't have to agree about what's true, if instead we could just agree about what is the next best step, then we could get somewhere. And that I I I just found that to be a very freeing thought.
Hmm.
I'm sitting here going, how will I convince the other people involved that this is true? And they're trying to convince me and they're trying to convince one another and everybody's trying to convince, and nobody can see it because everybody's in their own reptilian brain, because it's a high fear kind of, it's a high stakes, high fear
Yeah.
kind of situation. So everybody's in their reptilian brain going, no, like mom won't come get us unless we cry this way, or like, mom won't come get us in our crib unless we laugh or we're silly, or right. It's like we're reverting to what is the base layer of survival, and none of us will agree on what that is because we all had a different experience. Is that making sense at all?
It makes a lot of sense. And the this what you shared about everyone trying to convince everyone, there is another layer on that, because when you're coming from a place where you're trying to convince someone else and the other person is doing the same, basically, um, we actually tend to get to listen to find the flaw in the argument to try to answer that, instead of listen to actually connect and be able to understand.
Yeah.
So if we're listening to that surface level, what happens is we're just like playing ping pong, right? It's just
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, or tennis. Yeah, yeah, ping pong,
Yeah.
ping pong. Yeah,
We're never gonna get to an agreement.
yeah.
It's escalating to more conflict with that.
It's on your side. Yeah, it's on you.
It takes accepting that you're not gonna be uh, understood fully, and that people, like I said, people have different worldviews. People have different programming. People have different unconscious thoughts, even.
And we highlight certain things, and so I was recently able to make what I feel like was some really good progress in this area by having a one-to-one with one of the players where I sat and just listened and empathized. And instead of everything that coming up having an argument against everything that came up, it was like, oh wow, that must have really felt scary. Oh wow, that must, just reflecting back the emotions, and it created this opening and a softness. And I have some hope now, like, okay, we can now we can talk about what would be like action we can take that honors everybody instead of, and it just makes me think again, as most things do, of like the absurdity of our political spheres, of our, like of domestic leadership, of international relationships, where the energy is continuously, if we just we just need to get you to see it our way because we're right and you're wrong. And once you see it our way, things will be. I'm like,
I love that you shared that. And I think we discussed this in another episode, uh, because you sat one on one with this person, right? And I generally have a feeling that when it's two people, it's easier to get to connect and to find a middle ground than when there's more people involved, especially if it's a political scenario like we're saying, but even like if it's just friends, because the tendency is to get into that group behavior where you're trying to gather more people on your side,
yeah.
and then it becomes even more like a disagreement than an agreement.
Yeah, and I'm noticing the behavior of like other people who are also working to solve this, and it's a lot of list making. It's a lot of like, these are all the reasons why, you know, this one player is wrong, and these are all the reasons why we need to do it my way. And it builds up a wall, and I don't know, I'm a very stubborn person. And when I was little, my mom would call it, she would say, Megan, you're painting yourself into a corner, right? It'd be like, no, I don't want that. And I don't want that. And so it'd be like, I'm backing myself into a corner and limiting any possibility, So as a little kid, maybe it's something like, I wanted to go to the store, or I wanted to like go with a play date with that friend, and that friend's not available. Oh, okay. Well, what would you like to do instead? Do you want to go without? No. Well, do you want to just go to the park? No. And it would be like options that would have been good, right? Things I would have done well to say yes to. But the stubbornness of I can't get the thing I initially wanted, like my vision, my initial vision isn't available anymore. And so I'm just going to systematically say no to everything, and eventually be like, well, so do you want to just sit in in the dark by yourself and be miserable? Yes.
That's a good option.
Now who's sorry, right? And
Yeah.
so I recognize that behavior. It's a behavior that's like very, very core to me. So I'm like, oh, it's on my radar when I see it. And one of the things that taught me, and my mom had such a beautiful way of being with my stubbornness, is that we're going to be the most successful getting somebody to make a choice that's a helpful choice if we give them a way to come back. So in that stubborn little kid behavior, right? But my mom also had the option. She could have just said, well, fine, you're being a spoiled brat, and, nobody wants to be around you. So, like, oh, okay. How do you come back from that? Right. Now you're just embarrassed. So, how can we extend a hand and give somebody a way back into the conversation when they've gotten frustrated, when they didn't get the thing they want the first time around? And I think our impulse instead is to make the lists and go like, and you're also wrong for this reason. And da, 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 da. And we go, how could anybody make a choice that's going to be of benefit for the collective if they didn't paint themselves in the corner, but we pushed them into the corner, you know, but then we expect they're going to somehow be so magnanimous as to go, well, okay, I guess I will just be humble and do this. Like, no, we need to create space for somebody to get what they need in order to feel like they're being honored. And I just keep thinking, I think I talked about the Ina Garten memoir, but I just keep thinking about her, like the way she negotiates. And it's always, how can I get what I want? And how can I give the other person something that they want? Right? Which is the most practical thing. Right? And it involves empathizing with them and like, okay, I really want this, but what would be something that they would really want so that they would say yes to me getting my thing? But it is so smart because, and I think it highlights or it exemplifies, we don't need to agree. I don't need you to see my point of view. I don't need you to admit that I deserve to have this thing. We just need to take action together that's going to be mutually beneficial. So it's not about right and wrong. It's not about justice. It's like, okay, how can we both walk away from this feeling pretty okay?
I love that you brought this, how they can come back. And I think that might be a big insight from this as well, because of course this takes someone having a bigger vision, wanting to agree at first, right? And to find agreement, even if that doesn't mean like thinking the same or wanting the same exactly. But one, a dog is barking. But one thing that I do feel that it happened to me before, and I thought, oh, that's really beautiful how things can happen like this, is when instead of pointing fingers, you ask questions. So instead of saying like, oh, you've done this and this and this, you say like, why did this happen? Why what needs to happen for this to change or for that to change? Because when we bring again curiosity to things, then the person doesn't feel judged. You're actually bringing them into the conversation.
Yeah. I feel like there's also, it takes it out of the level of language so much and into the level of feeling. I watched a reel, I follow a lot of regenerative farmers on Instagram. That's my jam. And there was a reel where a guy was interviewing a farmer who's been farming like for 60 years or something. I mean, he's like very old school in this sense of like combines and you spray everything with pesticide and you add all these nutrients and stuff. And they were talking about this documentary that come out about regenerative agriculture. And the farmer was like, it really made me think and it opened my eyes. And they were having this wonderful connection, the interviewer and the farmer. And then the farmer was talking about, just this, like, I'm a Christian and this just makes me see like God put, he put everything here for us. And this feels like so much more aligned. And the interviewer said, well, I was raised Jewish. I don't really identify with religion, but when I'm in nature, I feel that wholeness. And so they were able to connect on the feeling. They were able to connect on like, there's something about this practice of, ripping all the nutrients out of the soil and then adding back in synthetics and then spraying with pesticides that feels so abrasive to my sense of wholeness with all that is, whether I call it God or nature. And I really appreciated that clip as a way of showing we don't have to agree on the language, on the specifics, in order to agree on the feeling or in order to hold that feeling in common. And then that feeling is what makes them want to take common action, right? So here they are with very different names for what's going on, both saying, I have this feeling of wholeness when I think about, you know, being with the soil and with nature in this way.
Yeah. And it also allows them to share their view, not from a place of judgment, but from a place of this is where we connect, and we might have different views in this, but we can agree in the feeling that we're having. We can agree on what is connecting us right now. This is it's beautiful. And a question that you asked in there, and I think I'm getting in a different context, but that question, what's going on? What's going on in your mind? What's going on when you do this? What's going on? This can be a simple, powerful question to get to actually understand, instead of just come from a place of this is how I see and you need to see it the same way as I do.
Yeah. And the connection began with curiosity, like you're
Yeah.
saying. And so there was even an opening for people to say, because wow, what a vulnerable thing. And that's not something that generally happens in our conversations where somebody feels open to say, these are my beliefs. And then the other person is like, oh, well, you know, I don't share those exact same beliefs, but here's where I feel you. Here's I can meet you over here. And that openness comes from, like, it started with a shared external input, right? Like here's this documentary we're talking about, and then what was the impact it had on you and why, and then that opened up for deeper, like here are the beliefs I have. Say more about the question, what's going on, like where have you used that, have you
I've done like yeah, I asked exactly what's going on when I noticed a friend had uh, let's say forgetfulness on things that he had to do, and like what's going on, instead of judging, what's going on, why that happened, like have you, is that anything happening in your life that is causing this, or like, because sometimes we get more like forgetful or like uh messy when something is happening,
yeah
but people will focus on the flaw, the problem, instead of even thinking what's going on in your life for you to be like that. And
Mhm.
then it's focused on like it's a problem in your character, or it's a flaw in your personality. It becomes like very uh, criticism on the person instead of seeing the circumstances. So more and more I feel like, how would I would like to be approached when I had these things in my life where I made mistakes, where I um, did something wrong, and it wasn't because I wanted to cause problems. And I know that because I felt judged, I ended up getting defensive and closing myself in the corner, like we're saying, and so on.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, I know that if I would point fingers the same way I was pointed fingers, I would probably not talk to this person and get angry and find all the ways where they did me wrong, and create a separation that I don't want. So instead of doing that, I think like, how can I pull in instead of push back? Like, what's going on?
Beautiful.
What's happening?
Beautiful. Yeah. So what's going on is like such a great triage for inviting somebody back in. It's like it probably works in almost every scenario.
Yeah.
And I do hear parents use this sometimes with kids who are having a big emotional outburst. What's going on?
Mm. What are you
Right?
feeling?
Yeah.
Because
Um,
sometimes I have a mentor that you mentioned parents. She mentioned a few times where she would ask this kind of thing to her kids when they got in a tantrum or something like that. And she said that sometimes the little ones would say like, I don't know, I have this feeling and I can't describe, and like, what can you and she asked like, can you sing the feeling? And then when they get to it, like suddenly it starts to transmute, as you know, with music,
Mm.
and starts dissipating, and then they can like express and process what they're feeling without having to like find there's something wrong, but I can't say what is wrong, because I don't have language for it.
Beautiful. Yeah, language can definitely become the barrier. Explain yourself.
Yeah.
Ah, I don't know. I mean, I think it's hard even as adults. Um, I become aware of this where I go, well, there's the explanation. I'll be upset and Grady will ask what's wrong. And I'm like, well, my brain wants to say this and this happened, but probably really what's wrong is I'm very tired. The explanation will always be once we have language developed, it'll always be there, but it doesn't mean it's true.
And it's often a story that we create to, yeah.
Well, we fill in meaning. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm always fascinated reading the like kind of pop science around this where they'll do experiments and I can't think of a specific one, but it's like they'll do an experiment and they will prep people in a certain way that they don't notice consciously. So it may be like the receptionist who greets them when they come in for the study will mention a word or something like this, right? Then they go in, they do the exercise, and sure enough, they like spot that word or they write that word or something. Then they'll be asked, okay, why did you choose that? They'll have a whole story in their mind. Oh, because my uncle used to be in a band and this was no, it's because the receptionist said that to you. So like the way the brain fills in gaps is brilliant, but not necessarily accurate.
Yeah.
So we just want to
We
be
are
careful
trying.
about putting too much weight and believing those things that we fill in.
Mhm.
I think this is the ultimate question. Like, what's going on? What are you feeling? What's happening for you? And then like showing, I want to hear your point of view, and let's um see how we can both come to an action we think is going to be beneficial, and it doesn't have to be seeing things the same way. And that means letting go of the defensiveness, and it means knowing it really doesn't matter. I mean, there's a big part of this that is being at peace with people seeing you different from how you see yourself. And boy, is that a doozy. That's the work of a lifetime.
Yeah. And often comes to the fact that when we are open and listening to people, they tend to listen to us more as well, because they can feel that, oh, we're in this together, instead of like you're trying to find where I'm wrong.
Yeah. The energy shifts.
The energy.
I asked, with this whole like, oof, stuff that's going on in my world right now, I was asking myself, what would Eckhart Tolle do?
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I know the first thing he would do. He would say, there's no such thing as problems except what we create in our mind, right? There's acceptance and action. And that was very helpful because I couldn't calm down and become empathetic until I stopped building up in my own mind all the reasons this is a problem and all the worst case scenarios. I was just whipping myself into anxiety, and that closed me to any possibilities. And just that first initial step of going, okay, well, the only place a problem exists is in my own mind when I make something a problem. So what is there to be done? Is this acceptance? Is this action? And it's a combination of both, right? It's like, oh, I need to accept that this is how other people feel and this is what they think is right. And then my action could be like examining that at a deeper level or holding space for somebody's feelings so they at least feel seen in the conversation instead of just shut down. And I'm very impatient. So I'm like, okay, but we don't have a big solution yet, but like, man, we've got far more progress than we had when it was just everybody going, I need you to see the way I see it. I need you to see the way I see it. So it's on one hand, it's like very intangible. On the other hand, I can point to, here's the progress. We at least had a conversation.
Yeah. Oh. It's always a progress when we can have a conversation instead of a debate.
And also, the progress is I'm no longer like in a whirlwind of anxiety.
Yeah.
I
still catastrophize quite a lot, like thinking the worst case scenario, and I think there's a place to it when you're preparing for the worst, and like if you know all the bad things that can happen, that you can do something to avoid to happen. That makes sense. But if you're just creating like things where you can't act to do anything about it, then it just becomes anxiety, like you said.
And the difference is breath.
Yeah.
And I even said this to one of the other players where I was like, because it's like there are some real consequences here that are scary, potential consequences. And it was like, yeah, but this could happen. I'm like, yeah. And if it does, how do you want to be here to receive it? In anxiety? No, you need to be like a samurai, dude. Like, you need to be so filled with pranic energy that you can face it. A warrior prepares not by spinning in anxiety, but by becoming so embodied and so embreathened.
Embreathened. I love
Embreathened. I mean, I guess that's what the word inspired is for, right? But like,
yeah, inspired.
But that anxiety is totally without breath. So it's not that we don't need to think about these very real things could happen, but you got to be present to those in the way of a warrior.
Yeah.
And it's okay if we don't agree on that.
It's okay if you don't agree with that. Speaking of not agreeing on that. Okay, what's going on is in curiosity is a way to bring people in to actually have a conversation. How to work with the views that can come from it when we feel triggered that, okay, but I don't agree on that. Because even if we approach something with openness, that doesn't mean that we're not gonna get stuck on something where I can't agree to this, and you need to find a way, but it's not by going back to then that we don't have a solution here.
Yeah. The only thing I know is hitting pause and going away and coming back. I mean, we certainly or I certainly can't be in that presence all of the time. I get
Yeah.
hella triggered. And I think the place of being agitated is not the place from which to have a conversation. And yeah, that's the only solution I know is to pause, go like, this is not the right. And I'm getting better at that. Like
Yeah.
again, sometimes you know when I'm upset and Grady will ask me what's wrong, and I'll say, I don't think I should make words right now.
I love that.
You know, it's like I could say something, but I think it would be nasty and not true. Like this is not the time for me to talk about this. And it's a much different scenario, you know, like with your partner and somebody you have that level of trust with. And just gets harder as it moves out. But just going, you know what? I'm getting, you know, I'm just kind of getting like not in my best headspace. I'm going to need to put a pin in this and we'll come back and we'll talk about it later. If we could say that more, I think it would be so much more productive than
For
just trying
sure.
to push through. I don't know. What's your what's your thought on what do we do when we're
I,
triggered?
I love that. I love that. Even just acknowledging that, like, this gets me uncomfortable. I rather think about it and come back to it later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the uncomfortable is a tricky word because phew, I am very conflict averse. And so just even having a conversation where we're talking about like, hey, this is the thing that needs to get solved in a very loving, kind way, that's terrifying to me. I mean, that is that's like I'm on the, you know, the top of a roller coaster looking down. And so there's that kind of discomfort, but it's different from knowing I'm triggered. And so maybe it's like also just, you know, going a few steps back, we have to get very familiar and intimate with what it feels like when we are triggered. We have to know, what does it feel like in my body when I am about to move into defensive mode, needing to make somebody else wrong mode, not being able to listen mode? What's the thing that happens right before all of that? Because I'm the only one who can spot that. That's my responsibility to go, "Ooh, I'm about to move out of um like conversation where I'm wanting to understand you and I'm wanting to connect, and I'm about to move into conversation where I'm just wanting to project and, you know, like fire bullets of language at the other person."
Yeah. And it takes self knowledge, right? It takes getting to understand that our triggers, the things that make us uncomfortable or angry or uh, anxious or anything that happens in a scenario like this, it's more about us than about the person that is talking with us. So we can take responsibility and see like this is a point where I can't continue.
Yeah.
So we have to put a press pause.
Yeah. And there's a lot of really backwards, unhelpful thinking around this, I think, with the idea of there needs to be a trigger warning on everything and everybody needs to feel safe in every conversation. Like there's a perversion of this idea. So for me, the healthy thing is like, oh, okay, I recognize, you know, my heart's starting to beat, my pulse is racing, you know, I'm getting hot and sweaty. I recognize I'm about to step out of my embodied present self into my trauma self or whatever it would be called, my reactive self. Okay, it's my responsibility to figure out what to do in the situation. Sometimes that's removing myself from the situation, so, right? But the perversion of that is people go, I should never have to feel triggered. And therefore, it is your responsibility to make sure that nothing could ever be said or shown to me in a book or talked about as an idea that could potentially make me feel that
Yeah,
discomfort.
that's just completely a big illusion. That
And
will
I
never
think
happen.
and I think is not accidental, because what it does is muddle the idea of becoming self-aware and becoming self-responsible about what it feels like to be triggered,
Yeah.
and the backlash against it. So the example I always go to is like the backlash against, you should eat healthy was Kentucky Fried Chicken coming out with a sandwich called the Double Down, which instead of bread had two pieces of fried chicken with bacon and cheese in the middle as a sandwich, right? Like that's the ultimate backlash. Like everybody knows that deep fried chicken with bacon and cheese in the middle as a sandwich is not a good thing for you to eat on a regular basis. Like that, we know that. But that was a backlash against, you can't tell me to eat healthy, right? So when we get these big movements, these big memes that happen in the culture, like safe space and trigger warning, the backlash against that is there's no such thing as trauma. There's no such thing as triggers. Pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, suck it up, be tough. And I'm like, no, you just set us back so many
It just
generations.
becomes more polarizing. It's ridiculous. Of course,
Yes.
there are triggers, but the solution to avoid triggers is not to, like, now we all need to watch ourselves and
Yeah.
everyone will be traumatized, but pretend they're not.
Yeah.
It, it's actually taking responsibility. Like when I mentioned, like, oh, I noticed that this is getting me anxious and so on. If we get curious again, like, huh, okay, I'm not present in the conversation anymore where I can solve this, but I can turn back and be present with myself and try to get curious on why this is getting me anxious so that I can use this opportunity to heal something
Yeah.
that is coming to surface. It's just like when a pimple is ready and it just pops and then you have clear skin again. It's like when it triggers, it's a moment where we can heal or we can hide.
Yeah. Yeah. And, going back to the beginning of our conversation around the 85 to 95% of our beliefs and thoughts about the world that are unconscious, that milieu that we are in from the time we were babies and we learned the world is a safe place or an unsafe place in these ways. Um, like a lot of the things go back to that, right? And so, of course, it it doesn't necessarily relate to this situation. The person is doing a thing that gives us the same feeling as a feeling we had of being unsafe when we were little. That doesn't mean this person is unsafe. And it does mean, as you were saying, it's an opportunity to dig it up. And I think it's really empowering to know it doesn't need to happen in real time.
Yeah.
We can do things like say, oh, you know what? Sorry. Can we come back to this conversation? I'm feeling like I won't be able to be calm and I don't want to bite your head off. It doesn't have to be anything like deep and this is reminding me of my childhood trauma. Just like,
Yeah,
oh,
it's like
can we come back to this? I don't want to bite your head off. Let me
it's
circle
not.
back on this.
And if it's the case, it's like it's nothing with you. I just need to
Yeah.
press pause.
Yeah, I need to press pause. And then the unwinding of it gets to happen when we feel self-resourced. Because if we force on the one hand, that shows us that something is coming up, but then there's also the question of, do I have the resources to examine that? And sometimes that means having some outside support from somebody else,
Yeah.
or just having what feels like a clear space and clear time. Like, gosh, I have a meeting in an hour. Maybe right now is not the time to unpack and go into deep emotion. But that can happen in stages, in little bits, and when those things come up, it's like, oh, there's the clue and I'm going to follow the clue. And that can be a very beautiful practice. And also, the more we can take it out of the realm of you've got to fix yourself, the better off we are. That's the other perversion that's happened around self-knowledge. It's like, live a self-examined life, which includes understanding why you're triggered and, making your honest try at not try, what is your honest effort at resolving that and giving yourself the love that's needed. But it's not, oh God, now I have one more thing to add to my gotta fix it list. Like, you're not an old house.
And I would even say, like, not every trigger needs to have a story about that. Like, because I feel like regular psychology is often like about the what happened in your life or in your childhood, whatever it is, that got you to feel like that now with this other thing.
Yeah.
No, I have the same feeling as we talked in Kundalini Yoga and in somatic practices as well. Like, not everything has to have a whole story behind it, and telling the story not always will solve the thing. But if the trauma is stored in the body and it is active and the moment, sometimes it just means like this is a time to shake it off.
Yeah.
Like, just allow it to move and move it instead of getting all tense and stop breathing, like I said, like removing the breath and getting anxious and starting to catastrophize. If we get to move in those moments, it often will resolve itself, and it might be that we get a big insight out of it that gets it clear. It might not. It might be that it's just like, oh, I feel better now. Great.
Yes.
That's all we need to do.
Dance and cry without needing a reason why.
Yeah. Without having to have an explanation of why. But why are you feeling like this? A lot of my triggers, I see that it's about being asked when I was feeling bad. Like, what's happening? Why are you feeling this? Why are you acting like this? And then I need to think, what's wrong with me? What? Why am I feeling? Why? I must be crazy. I must have something wrong with me, and then it creates a bigger problem than it solves. It's not about asking like what's wrong. It's about like, okay, I'm feeling this. How this energy needs to move.
That's beautiful. I relate to that. So going back to the, this big insight that we are both having around like, oh, what's going on is a good question. It needs to be paired with observing how that is having an impact and seeing that if asking what's going on is creating more tension and more receding, to just be like, oh, I'm just gonna go get an iced tea. I'll see you in a minute. Like it's oh, okay. So that's my big insight of the day. It's not the words that have the power. It's not the question, what's going on. It's the energy of curiosity. It's the energy of, I want to know what your experience is, but I don't demand that you tell me that in words.
Yeah.
And I care what your experience is.
Yeah.
Maybe that's it. Like having the energy of, I care what your experience is.
Yeah. I want to understand generally and not I'm trying to find what's wrong with you.
Yeah. That's definitely my big insight for the day. What's your big insight?
I love that. I actually mentioned one of the big insights early on, and I forgot what it was. It was something that you mentioned, actually. It wasn't the what's going on, although what's going on was one of the big ones.
Was it about inviting people back in?
Yes.
How to way to come back?
How to keep it open so that they can come back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oof. And it's such the polar opposite of what we generally do, which is demonize somebody to the point of them feeling like they can't come back. There's no
And that actually brought me one more thing, because it might be a good idea when we are in that state where we can still be in this what's going on, I actually want to understand, and in that space of inviting people in, that we can, like, before we have a conversation where we know there might be misagreement on this,
Uh-huh.
setting the stage to, like, I'm trying to understand and I want you to understand as well, but let's make it clear that if either of us feel triggered, uncomfortable with anything in this, instead of escalating the conversation, we can put a pin and leave it open for us to come back. And when we are more understanding, instead of feeling like we need to finish this now and end up like splitting instead of coming together.
Oh, amazing. You can tap out.
Yeah. I'm out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even like sports, like fighting sports, have this like
Exactly, right? And
just have
that's something so important. Like in wrestling, right? It's you want to have a clear, delineation of who won, but you don't want anybody dying.
yeah, exactly.
Uh,
It's a good thing for us to learn from.
Brilliant. I love it.
Love it.
Thank you so much for this conversation. So for anybody watching, be so curious to hear from you. What are your thoughts on whether we need to agree in order to act in concert with others? Do we have to make them see our point of view? Is it okay if they don't see our point of view? Is it okay if they walk away thinking we're idiots, but they do the thing and we do the thing that creates a better outcome for us both? What's more important, the outcome or the who's right?
Yeah.
Love to hear
Love
from
it.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Till next time, have a beautiful new year and talk soon.